Hi, it's Tatum. Before we start the episode, I just wanted to tell you that we're going to be on BBC Lifeline Appeal. Shine Cancer Support is going to be on Sunday the 23rd of February at 12:50 on BBC One. And our appeal is hosted by David Caves from BBC's Silent Witness. And several members of the Shine community are going to be featured, sharing their story. We'd love your help to spread the word about this, so tell everyone that Shine Cancer Support is going to be on the BBC. We're on Sunday, the 23rd of February, for the BBC Lifeline Appeal at 12:50 BBC One. And if you can't see it, check out our website, shinecancersupport.org. All the information's on there too. Thanks so much.
From Shine Cancer Support, this is
Not Your Grandma's Cancer Show.
This is not your grandma's cancer show.
Hi, I'm Tatum, and today we are talking about the language of cancer. When we get diagnosed, we're suddenly thrown into this whole new world where we're, having to navigate cancer cliches, figure out, is cancer now part of our identity? And when we want to share things with other people, are we being heard in the way that we mean to be? Is language actually getting in the way? So I have two great guests with me today. We're going to hear from Gemma shortly. She's been on the podcast before. Last time she was on an episode where we were talking about movement. And today she's going to share a bit about how her and her husband have found their own language when it comes to talking about cancer. But first of all, we're going to talk to Joss. So we have lots to do. Let's get going.
This is not your grandma's cancer show.
Not Your Grandma's Cancer Show.
Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much for having me.
Tell me, what was happening in your life when you were diagnosed?
My main memory of that sort of time is mostly 30th birthday parties, I think, including my own. But I was just at that point where my close friendship group was at every single weekend we were having a 30th birthday party, kind of coming towards the end of the year in 2023. Everybody exhausted, kind of going out every weekend. And I was not really feeling myself. My symptoms were very unusual. I think not things you'd expect from testicular cancer. There's no sort of lumps or anything like that. They were more very, very unusual, weird things that were making me feel a little bit strange in my body. But yeah, mostly doing that, thinking about trying to buy a house and looking at loads of houses and none of them being right, and going to loads of 30th birthdays. That's how I'd sum it up.
Yeah, I mean, that sounds super fun, but it also sounds quite exhausting, like there's so much going on. So when you started to get those first symptoms, did you just kind of think, oh, I've just been partying too hard, there's just too many 30ths?
Yeah, that was definitely kind of part of the way that I thought about it, I think. One of the things I experienced was I have later associated this with sort of hormonal imbalance that was related to the cancer. I've never really had that confirmed to me, but I really felt like very stressed, and I would have a big stress response to something quite small. Something happened at work, I'd really feel my heart rate go, and I'd kind of feel really panicky, which I know myself quite well is not how I would have responded to that normally. But it's also not something that makes you think, oh, I've probably got testicular cancer.
No.
Because I'm feeling a bit panicked and stressed out.
No.
I've still never had it confirmed if they're related, but it certainly went away when I got the cancer treatment. So I wonder if that was what was going on. But definitely it makes you question, like, is it just other stresses in my life or other things going on? Or is it something more serious going on medically?
So how did you get your diagnosis? What was the sort of final thing that happened that you got listened to and tested?
Initially, my first ever thing was like kind of the summer before, maybe June, July, and I had pain in my back and kind of lower stomach. Again, didn't really think much of it, but it was bad enough to go to the GP. And that was sort of explained as like it was probably an infection of some kind. We'll just give you some antibiotics and it'll go away. Took the antibiotics. It did go away, I assume by complete coincidence, but just over a few days, the pain went away. And nothing really happened other than that sort of strange feeling I've described. And then January 2024, so about 6 months later, that pain came back, which seemed really unusual. Like, why would I have had the same infection? And I also had a kind of strange swelling in my kind of left breast, which was like slightly sore and a bit unusual. Again, enough to go to the GP. And it was more the swelling in the breast than anything else, as well as the pattern, like having presented twice. The GP, luckily a good GP, was like immediately like, I remember the first thing he said is, have you got history of cancer in the family? So he straight away knew like something was going on. I think he might have thought it was breast cancer. It wasn't. But, that started a kind of chain reaction of full body MOT, test everything, 5 or 6 blood tests, and then they hit the jackpot and found their testicular cancer through a blood test in the end.
So you get to that point and the word cancer is just out there at that point. And then it's really quick for you, wasn't it, to get into treatment? So you didn't have much of a chance to sort of really absorb that and start telling people your news. Did you find that people were using that lovely expression, at least? Or at leasting?
Yeah, when I'm telling them about my diagnosis, when I think about that though, I think I was the one doing it the most. I have to say, I was trying to get out ahead of it. I think that within hours of the diagnosis, I was saying, well, listen, I don't have like young kids. I haven't just bought this house that we were looking for, and being barely able to afford a new mortgage and all these things, and feeling like, oh, but at least I'm lucky to do this. At least I'm lucky to do that. I think I introduced that into the language of the of my sort of social group, maybe as a bit of a defense mechanism or just to keep myself positive. So that's definitely my sort of reflection on at leasting, which I became aware of a bit later. That's a thing people do of like, oh, well, silver lining is this. But I think I was all silver linings at the start. I was like, give me anything, getting out ahead of it. So yeah, I don't really remember other people adding to my long list of at least that I was trying to put out into the world.
Did you have any strange reactions though when you were telling your friends?
Mostly, I would say everyone was absolutely amazing and like surprised me in a really positive way. But you do get really weird ones, and particularly people who maybe you don't even have that much of a relationship with anyway, but they find out someone tells someone who tells them. It's like someone you went to school with, years ago, and they pop up with the weirdest stuff. And definitely the thing of like the worst ones I got were people who I didn't really know that well popping up with sort of advice. And, it's a sort of, carrots cure cancer type, nonsense that comes through really long WhatsApp groups. I've got an affiliate link you can use for this thing to get a discount on medications. And like, it's the last thing you need. And it's the last thing I'd have expected to get, I think. So you definitely do see that, or I did, some very weird reactions, more from people on the outside of my social group, I'd say, like slightly further away from me, who I don't normally hear from.
Yeah, sometimes at Shine we call them sort of cancer tourists or looky-loos, and they just seem to pop up and you'd never know unless you had cancer that they were one of them, that they have an affiliate link ready to go with some strange herb. When did you sort of start to think that your experience of normal conversation was changing? I know that you went really quickly into treatment. Was that a time when it suddenly started to change?
Yeah, I would say it changes almost immediately. So yeah, my diagnosis, I got a diagnosis on a Thursday and started chemo on the Monday, and then had chemo sort of like every day that week. So it was, that moment was, I've described before as like psychologically violent moment to go through, basically. Like, it was, your whole world is upside down. You're not going into work on Monday. This is your new reality now. And so when everything or something that fundamental changes, like language does change immediately as well. So yeah, I think the language changed completely. I mean, you're immediately having medical conversations with people, with healthcare professionals, that Wednesday, Thursday, Friday that week before going into chemo, I had various appointments, loads of different departments in the hospital. They're trying to find a line between like explaining what's happening to you, but not overburdening you with, because they're aware that they're sort of tearing your life to pieces in these conversations, So that was very unusual, and I really want to know what's going on, but I don't really have any capacity to take in the information perhaps that I'm being told. They're aware of that, I'm aware of that, everyone's trying their best. You suddenly become a sort of micro expert on this particular type of testicular cancer and what the treatment might mean. And then you go through those whole conversations and realize a few days later, like, I never even asked this super obvious thing that I really want to know, because it just whirlwinded past you. And so, yeah, I think you adapt really quickly. It all seems normal language, part of my life now. But yeah, it all came in a big rush over about 2 or 3 days after my diagnosis.
And how was it during chemo? I know you've talked to me about your cancer nurse that you loved, who was really nice.
Yeah, so many. So I was at Guy's Cancer, and the chemo nurses there were like it was just the absolute joy and pleasure of doing it. They made it like something that I could enjoy doing. I mean, as mad as that sounds, because it's obviously horrible to go do chemo, but they were amazing. They're a very varied bunch, I guess. There's ones who I liked more than other ones, and there were some there who were just absolutely amazing people. I'll remember them forever. But yeah, even they say weird things sometimes, and they like forget that you're a cancer patient because you're just having a chit chat. I remember having a conversation with one of them about like what we did at the weekend, and she'd had a big sort of party. She'd been out, had a roast, been watching whatever it was, international rugby, and having 12 Guinnesses. And she was like, "What did you do? Did you go out for a roast?" And I was like, "No, I like slept and tried not to die, in my room for the whole weekend. It was rubbish." So yeah, even there, linguistically, it kind of you do get a bit of a disconnect, even though they're a chemo nurse and they spend all their working life, understanding what you're going through.
Yeah, I mean that expression, linguistic disconnect, really does sort of summarize, this topic really, that maybe there isn't enough language to really talk about the experience of being diagnosed. And I was thinking about that pressure of society when it comes to how we even discuss cancer. And I know that you read an article by an oncologist about this.
I did, yeah. I avoided reading anything and still sort of have. Like, I've never Googled my diagnosis. I sort of don't want to know. And I have generally avoided the book recommendations I've been given about, how to die from cancer or whatever. So, stuff people send you that you're like, wow, okay, no thanks. But there was one exception. I think it was like a day or two after my diagnosis. I just got a link to this, and it was I did find her name the other day. I'll have to let you know what it is. It's an oncologist writing for The Guardian who writes a regular kind of column there. And it was about what she'd learned, I think. And I was diagnosed pretty soon after the King, which I think shows how important I am. And so she's writing a bit about that and other things. And she described the language of cancer as the language of miracles and tragedies. Now, particularly having had the last year that I've had, I understand completely what that is. That is the language we sort of inherit about cancer before it comes into our lives, I think, from Hollywood and from kind of friends of friends, people people die from cancer, or people heroically beat cancer, and that's all that happens. That's the language, and I think that has loads of downstream ramifications when you're trying to connect with people about the reality of cancer, and you're trying to share good news or bad news or just news, anything, but people want to put it into one of those categories. Like, is this a miracle that you're so strong and you're going to defeat this thing, or is it like a tragedy and now unfortunately we're going to lose Joss, because those are the only two things, whereas the reality of it doesn't correspond to that binary at all. I don't think. That's my experience of it anyway.
Yeah, that really is so interesting because it's almost oppressive in that that lack of a spectrum, and how things then get away from you. You end up having to put a caveat on a bit of good news because you want it to kind of be somewhere in the middle. This isn't a miracle, but this also isn't a tragedy. And being able to convey that and not having, a lot of the language pathways already there makes it tricky. So did your relationship to news change and how you said things?
Yes, it was certainly, my relationship to news was different from how I'd have thought it would be, I suppose, because I would have also thought in terms of miracles and tragedies until the sort of mundane reality of life with cancer kicks in, and you're like, oh, it's just, this number has changed slightly. That doesn't mean anything. A lot of the good news, it is only the absence of bad news in a way. It's only like, I went for the scan and it hasn't got worse. Like so that's good news, right? Because it's sort of, that's what we want to be happening. But it's not, I went for the scan and I'm a sort of medical marvel and everything's done and I never have to go back. There are no bright lines and there are no silver bullets. There's no meeting I've ever had that sort of, in a positive way, like changed the game. But that said, I've only really had what you would call good news since my diagnosis. Like that's been my journey so far. And I know that's not everyone's journey, but I obviously had the diagnosis, which is, we'll call that bad news. And then after that, it's kind of like, oh, the chemo worked and it did what we wanted it to do. And, X, Y, and Z, and this now looks good. And we can get you in for the surgery, and the surgery's gone okay. And like, it's all been fine ever since then. The idea of good news and bad news is still, I would say, the only area, or the main area, where I would really struggle to communicate with my loved ones about what is happening. And I get it, because if I want to share something that is quite mundane, say, of like, oh, this blood result has gone to 0, which is now healthy and normal. I've been in that meeting with the oncologist. I know that can just go straight back up again at some point, like that might happen. But if you tell someone like, hey, that's gone, that means using this test now, you can no longer tell that I have cancer. People freak out. Oh my God, congratulations, man. We've got to do that. That's such good news. And you kind of want to be like, hey, no, pump the brakes. That's not what it feels like at all. It just feels like, hey, at least it's not like that. It hasn't gone up. That would be the bad news. So it's still really difficult to find the words to, how do you tell someone that like, oh, there's no cancer there anymore, but that sort of, mad way doesn't mean I don't have cancer anymore. And I still am a sort of cancer patient. It might come back. All this is so complicated. And yeah, those moments of sharing news is where you sort of see that disconnect the most, I think, between people's expectations and your reality.
Yeah, absolutely. What I could really hear in there is that at those moments is a time that you really want to connect, right? Because there is a piece of news that you're looking to share with somebody. And actually, when that reaction, it's almost like they're hearing a different, they need an interpreter for it. It means that you're not getting the reaction that, would have held you in that moment. They're a little bit confused. And these words that we used to, so easily share, especially with friends, then become, it's so much harder to connect, which is why a lot of people end up just not sharing news anymore and actually closing down. But I know what you did was you actually started a bit of a PR campaign around words. Can you tell me about that?
I think when you're the person in a social group that is sort of critically ill or needy all of a sudden, and there is at least this moment, short, medium term, where it's all really about you for a few days, weeks, months. Like everybody's, how can we help? And people want to reach out. It throws a sort of a form of leadership on you, right? People are, in a way, although everyone's supporting you, they're also looking to you a little bit for leadership on, well, how am I supposed to talk to you? What is going on? I'm the one who has all the information to share. And therefore, I think I sort of get to dictate, or hopefully I get to dictate, like, how are we as a group going to talk about this? Which I now kind of refer to as the PR campaign. So I was very much like, I want to talk about it, first of all. People aren't sure, like, oh, is he just never going to want to talk about this? And like, no, I always want to talk about it. I think it's really interesting in a way, it's a fascinating thing that's happening. There's loads of interesting detail, and I'm learning all the time about cancer and treatment and all this kind of stuff. And I want to talk about that and share that. And also, like, so we are going to talk about cancer, and we're going to be like positive. I talked loads about like gratitude, which I think before cancer I'd have been like, oh, that's some wishy-washy nonsense. That doesn't have a part in my life. But that I found to be like my greatest tool of like feeling positive about it and being grateful for the things that I did have through that journey. And I wanted other people to have that language as well. I didn't want like, oh, you're so strong, you're so brave. I didn't want like F cancer, we're gonna get this thing. It's you versus the beast. I wasn't interested in any of that language. I didn't want to shy away from talking about it, because I think it's natural that everybody around me would be curious about it, as was I. So I tried to push that out, I think, consciously, subconsciously, to set the agenda, control the narrative, and say, like, this is how we're going to talk about it. This is what makes me comfortable, and this is what I think is the best way of talking about it for us all. So yeah, that's sort of what I did. I felt like I put a lot of time and energy into sort of setting that and allowing other people to follow that lead around me, which made me happier.
Yeah, and I'm sure it made them feel more comfortable as well. I mean, I think that kind of thing can really work if you have the energy to really introduce a whole different way of interacting or bring it into, well, I would have talked to you about, my job, my house, anything else. I just want it to be another normal thing. You mentioned the word positive in there, and that is something that gets very loaded in the cancer world. What does that word mean to you?
I have a really clear, strong memory of my first day doing chemo. And I went in and I was it's like a slightly sick first day at school feeling, you're like, oh my God, here we go. And these are the people who are going to look after you and this is how it's all going to work. And I sat down and I thought there would be a bit more like blitz spirit or the feeling of being in the trenches. I thought there would be more sort of camaraderie of the people who were there with me. It's a huge chemo ward at Guy's Cancer. So you're in a room with sort of 12 other people, and there are 3 rooms, so sort of 36 patients at any given time. And I assumed it would be like that. There'd be some sort of wise old fellow next to me who would share like, welcome to the chemo ward, and this is what it's going to be like. And someone over here was new like me, and it would be more of a human interaction. The reality of it is, frankly, a lot of people are just quite tired and like falling asleep. But the thing I noticed is the person, everyone who was awake and who was talking, and the person opposite me as well, they were like really, really miserable. And I've now done 3 months of chemo. Like, I understand why these people are miserable. It's a horrible place to be. But I remember just how much that struck me and how much I thought, like, I really don't want to spend a long period of my life in that headspace if I can possibly avoid it. It looked like such a horrible place to be. And chemo's physically horrible as well. And so I think that that moment was kind of a thing for me, like, okay, I really don't want to be that person. And I really don't want to pass judgment on anyone who was really miserable and complaining the whole time, because I can't stress enough that I get it. But I just thought that won't help me. And so positivity for me was about not being there, like trying not to spend a long time essentially just running over and over and over my complaints of like how unfair this is, or how it could have been avoided, or how it must be somebody else's fault, or living in that kind of negative space. I wanted to feel much more positive and grateful for the things that I did have, grateful for the amazing treatment that I was getting, grateful for the people around me who were supporting me, and just spending more of my time and energy actively trying to be in that headspace just to cope with it and get through that time.
Yeah, it's really interesting hearing you talk about that, because I also hear you holding on to a bit of your personality and kind of looking around and going, okay, I don't want to, I just want to do it my way and have it be me. And actually, I remember when I was first diagnosed, the first night I threw a party and I called it Drinks and Positivity. And within about 6 months, my relationship to the P word really changed, really changed. But that was where I started, was like, and I think that was trying to hold on to a bit of me. But over time, I felt other people's impression of that word, or what they assumed I should be, came with it. I think it ended up being quite loaded. Like, people would be like, just be positive. And I was like, I have to be tenacious. I have to remember things. I have to fill in forms. I have to do paperwork. I have to subject myself to exams and scans and everything that I don't want to do. And so sometimes it can be as small as that word just, that can take you out of the connection. And I also think it's quite different when it's being driven by you as opposed to somebody else putting their positivity onto you. Gemma, I'd love to bring you into the conversation here. How has it been for you hearing from Joss?
I definitely identify with a lot of that, particularly around the mundanity that you were talking about, and where everyone wants it to be this tragedy or this miracle, whereas actually most of it's just really quite boring. I think we all got a little taste of that over the pandemic as well, didn't we? When we were all like, hey, it's the end of the world. Who thought it would be this boring? Like, who knew? So yeah, I definitely identify with that. And what you were saying about that kind of trenches mentality, the like camaraderie you thought you'd get in the hospital, I am going to have to say that you have to bring that yourself, unfortunately. I've got a terrible tendency to be the one going, hey, everybody, I've come in for my drugs today. How are you all doing? And but by the time I leave, everyone shared their whole life story, and I leave going, bye, have a lovely day. So yeah, you have to be the one that kickstarts that, and then you find the wise old guy. He'll be like, "Oh, I've been doing this for years." So yeah.
So you have found pearls of wisdom in there.
Yeah.
Oh, and Gemma, tell us what was happening in your life when you were diagnosed.
Well, I was diagnosed over the pandemic, so it was 2021. It made it kind of difficult in a way. I was a personal trainer, so and my first symptoms were like a backache, and I mean like a really bad backache. That was an issue. I was training people outside because of the pandemic, and I had to carry my heavy kit to and from work, so that gave me like a real struggle. All communications with pretty much everyone was going on over Zoom, so that was a kind of real thing as well. I didn't get that kind of, I couldn't have a party. Or so sad. Not that I would have done, but it was an odd time where you didn't actually get that chance to communicate with people in person. It was all done like kind of over Zoom and through social media and text messages.
So you had trained as a nurse, so
I had, yeah.
Some of that medical language you were deeply familiar with. Did you notice your language changing from before cancer to after your diagnosis?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't finish training as a nurse. I started training as a nurse. So I had that I was familiar with a kind of a medical environment. But this was the first time I'd been on it on the other side. One thing that always stands out for me is that I can remember, I mean, this was years ago that I was nursing. So cancer treatments moved on a lot. But quite often when we would have handover, they would say something like someone had bony mets, and you kind of thought, oh no, oh poor them, because you're like, oh, that's it now, we're on the end if there's bony mets. So when you're suddenly on the other side of it, it feels a lot different, like this is just something else that you have to deal with. Does that make sense? So these words are very different when they are related to you, and I think that ties into like kind of how scary cancer feels as well. People who will just sound so terrified, like, oh, at least it isn't cancer. Maybe that's a bit of the at leastism, but when you actually do have cancer, they can't say that. So there's this kind of, oh, but you feel a little bit like, oh well, the worst has happened now, so well, but this is all fine. I
do hear that kind of miracle and tragedy that, yeah, there would have been a thing with certain words like, oh, that's it. But you're now, those words, those really scary words, now are our life. That's yeah, just the way it is. And
they're your reality, and they are now, it's like they move from one box into another box. Yeah. They move from the at least box into the well, that's what it is, that's reality box. So yeah.
Also what you said in there that made me think back to that positivity that we were chatting about with Joss, was language. How we relate to it changes so much when it is about us. And I think these really scary terms, and then also whether we're saying it or whether someone else is saying it, can make so much difference. And I know that you've encountered some cancer cliches, and I'd love to hear from you kind of what is conjured up in your mind when you hear of cancer thriver, for example.
Oh, see, cancer thriver, that's the one that I always, when you see that, it's always in social media bios, isn't it, whether people describe themselves as a thriver. That one kind of conjures up in your mind, like you're living your best life despite cancer. These people they're bungee jumping and they're traveling. It almost feels like trying to paint it as a positive kind of thing. So yeah, back to that positivity.
And also an identity.
Yeah. Yeah, so I think you can't help but kind of take cancer on a little bit as part of your identity, even if you're kind of going, I don't want cancer to be my identity. You're still not letting that happen, because it is just such an all-consuming thing that happens. And so I think those words are the way we frame ourselves. So, you know, you find that, you know, the people who use the term thriver, whether they are actually bungee jumping or traveling, maybe that's the way they want to think of themselves. Whereas the word like warrior, which is the other one, the cancer warrior, that's got a little bit more gritty, isn't it? Like, you're rolling around in the mud with cancer now. Like, yeah.
Which also brings us to how people describe their cancer. I mean, I've met a girl that called her cancer Bob. But, you know, whether we think of it as something external or something that's a part of us, and just, I'd love you to come into the conversation here.
No, I remember thinking about this and I probably would have thought of it that way before I ever had my own experience of cancer. It's you versus cancer. And then as soon as it happened, I was like, it doesn't feel like that at all. It doesn't feel adversarial. It doesn't feel like F you cancer and I'm going to beat you. It very much felt like it was part of me. I remember describing it as like, it's just more me, but it's just like too much more me. You know, it's like, my body started making more me and it won't stop. But that's kind of all that's happening. But it didn't feel like me versus the cancer. If anything, it felt a bit like the medicine versus the cancer, and I was just sort of there, like letting these two forces play out. But I didn't really have that much to do. I just had to sort of survive my treatment in a way. That's definitely how it felt.
Yeah, and I mean, even that word survive, right? Survive and survivor. Gemma, what's your relationship to those words?
That made me think, actually, when you were saying just in the middle, just to go back to that, because they're all very active words that we use, aren't they? So whenever we talk about cancer, you know, whether it's warrior, thriver, whatever, they're all very active. And really, yeah, like a huge part of it is you just like, well, I was just here. I didn't really have much choice. It was all just happening around me, and there I was. But but survive is a very interesting one, I think, because my cancer is incurable. I can't remember where Joss is on the scale, but yeah, survivor is always a really interesting one, and I quite often see when people describe themselves as a multiple myeloma survivor, and I think so far, not to be like mean, but you kind of go, people will call you a cancer survivor, and you think, well, yeah, but it's not gone. So how long do we use that word for? If you're a cancer survivor, is that just an imminent thing? Does it just mean it didn't kill you last week? Does it mean it didn't kill you 5 years ago? Or is it something we're looking into the future? So it's a word that I think changes meaning a lot when you're living with it. People want you to be a cancer survivor. They want it to be that miracle. But even if you don't have an incurable cancer, I think we all know that it's still something you have to think about. It's not a thing where you can just be, well, yeah, that's over now. We've dealt with that. I've survived it, and let's all move on.
Yeah, I've described it as a cancer undergoer at one point. I underwent it. I hesitated with that word survivor because I was like, well, until I know I've died of something else, I don't know if it's accurate yet. You know, because it's a place in time. And I know that you, Gemma, and your husband have your own sort of in-words for talking about cancer. Can you share a little bit about that?
Riddled is the one we use most. We could be talking about, I don't know, anything, going on holiday, and you'll kind of go, oh, well, as long as I'm still here. Oh, yeah, because you're riddled. yeah, I'm riddled. Well, I don't think my mum and dad like it much. And I say that, but again, that's the context word. Like, you know, my husband can tell me I'm riddled, but if my hematologist or a doctor or just someone I just met said that, I'll probably be a little bit twitchy. But yeah, we definitely use riddled a lot. Riddled, it's a great word. Riddled.
And I mean, what I can see is that it really it makes you laugh. You know, especially if you're like, no, I'm not making tea. I'm riddled. I'm like, no.
I have cancer.
Right.
I can't cook. I have cancer. But probably the answer to that is always, it's our cancer.
Which, like, the fact that it makes you laugh, again, is a very different relationship to, you know, a word in a different context and how it makes you feel at that particular moment. And, you know, in another space, someone kind of co-opting someone else's cancer, going, oh, it's ours. And you're like, what is it? You know, but actually when that is understood, when that, you know, clearly that communication, you've made your own pathways, you know, with your partner about, you know, what's funny, what you like, what makes you laugh, what makes it kind of lighter to carry almost.
Yeah, and that's we've always done that since the very beginning. It's always a kind of, I don't know if that's it. I think that's probably a thing I have about everything is I think I very much use humour as my shield a little bit. So we do that. So yeah, we do joke about it a lot. It is part of your life, isn't it? So I mean, I quite often get that as well. I mean, even like I had a flu jab. The person giving the flu jab was like, and why do you get this? And I was like, well, I have cancer. And then the face does the,
the head
body language.
tilt.
Oh, the head tilt. And they go, oh. And as I left, they were like, oh, well, you're very positive. You're very positive about it, and you kind of go, I don't know what they expect from me. Like,
right.
Like, what was I going to do? Well, I have cancer. And start sobbing. It's just, what's the expectation as to how you're going to deal with this? What language am I supposed to use when it's me? Am I supposed to be like preempting the head tilt, going in there with, I have cancer?
What I also heard was the arm strokers, and I was like, oh, yes, I haven't heard it quite put that way, but yes, the little hand on the outside of the arm, you know, and yeah. And what the vision I'm getting is of a house of, you know, the funhouse mirrors, that the same words rebounding off the different mirrors, and how we're seeing ourselves and how that gets stretched and distorted. And how do you find that language that makes you look and see yourself as you are instead of these wavy mirrors? I've got a question for both of you. If you could create a new word about cancer or the experience, what would your new word be? So let's go to Gemma and then Joss.
Okay, I had a couple. Statastrophe was my first one. You go, oh, I've been statastraphizing again.
Say that one more time for me, because I love the sound of it, and it sounded so good. What does it start with?
Stat. Catastrophe. So like catastrophe, but with stat at the beginning. For that bit when you suddenly decide at 3 o'clock in the morning that what you really need to do is Google your life expectancy for the 150th time, even though you definitely already looked at that before. And so you need to look that up, and you need to find some more things, and you need to go, and then you need to do it by age, and you need to do it by stage, and you need to know how that's changed, and you end up going down the rabbit hole, catastrophizing. Yeah, you need to tell everyone I'm catastrophizing again.
Brilliant. And I first heard the term scanxiety from talking to other people with cancer, and I think we need more words like this.
Yes.
And what was the other one, Gemma?
Well, the other one is something I think we should be all issued with if we get a cancer diagnosis, and that's a concierge.
Oh, yeah.
They're like a concierge for cancer. Yeah, so that they can help you with all the admin that no one tells you is going to become your full-time job when you get a cancer diagnosis.
Yeah.
Yeah, so managing all your appointments and whether your drugs are being delivered on time, or whether you have to have your blood test how many days before your appointment, and you've got to sort that out yourself. No one else is doing that for you. Yeah, there should be someone who's in charge of that.
does it have to be a one? I mean, I'm just wondering, could this be AI? A cancer, I can't even say it, concierge?
Concierge.
Concierge, to like organize everything. Oh, I mean, that sounds amazing. As someone even in like the best frame of mind, I've always called myself a formophobe because I freak out when I see forms and I feel like I can't fit in the boxes and then I just run away and I never fill them in. Even really important forms that I would get really useful things from, I just never fill them in. And so cancer was like this nightmare of forms and admin, and with the brain fog and everything else, it was just I was way off what I was able to handle. So that sounds incredible. Joss, do you have a word or two that you would like to introduce?
Yeah, I absolutely love this. I've got loads of them. I think there are loads of things that are like novel concepts that you come across in cancer and you're like, oh yeah, we need a word for this. The first one I put is drama, which is what we've talked about before of like I've defined it as the mundane reality of outwardly extraordinary things. So everybody thinks your life is going to be like crazy and people sort of being like scalpel and people rushing around and it's all crazy, and actually you were just sitting in a waiting room because your drugs haven't been ordered from the pharmacy yet and you've just got to sit there for an hour and then get the train back home, but the train's cancelled, and then it's so boring, like 99.9% of it. So instead of melodrama, I want to call that the drama.
Brilliant.
Of cancer.
Oh, thank you so much to both of you for being here and talking about this with us. And for all of you listening, send us your words. We really, really want to hear them because I think it's this that it's how we reconnect, right? And we hear a word and then we can describe it to someone else. We can say to our loved ones, actually, this really makes me laugh. Like, let's use this word. Let's talk about a dollar drama. Did I get that right? Yeah. And
Statastrophe.
Statastrophe. Brilliant. And once it becomes a word and people know that it's already used, then it makes them go, oh, I'm not alone in doing that. And you are so not alone with that. So thank you so much for being here. To all of you listening, get in touch with shinecancersupport.org. We have a fabulous new website. You'll be able to see Gemma on there. Have a look at our personal experiences. Joss, do you have a personal experience up there?
I do.
Fabulous. So find out more about them. Join our community. We really want to meet you. We really want to hear your words. Till next time. Bye.
Bye.
This is not your grandma's cancer show.
Not Your Grandma's Cancer Show.